12.5 million Africans were forced onto ships bound for the Americas. About 10.7 million survived the crossing. That's not a vague figure. It comes from a database of nearly 36,000 individual slave voyages. And here's what that number actually did. It didn't just move people, it cut a cord. The Africans who were taken lost their languages, their names, their religions, their families deliberately over generations. So the descendants who became Black Americans grew up with a hole where the homeland used to be. And the Africans who stayed grew up never knowing the cousins who were taken. Same family, split in two. One half forgot the other on purpose because they were forced to. Now here's the part that turns into an argument even today. You'll hear it thrown like a weapon. Africans sold their own people. And the truth is genuinely complicated, so let me be careful. Some African kingdoms and merchants did participate in the trade. That part is real. Historians don't deny it. But here's the context that almost always gets dropped. The trade was driven by European and later American demand. Europe and America built the ships, financed the voyages, and built the plantations that swallowed millions of human beings. There was no single Africa choosing this. There were hundreds of separate peoples, often at war with each other, and the trade tore those societies apart too. So when someone says, your people sold us, they're taking a real painful fragment and turning it into a whole story that history doesn't support. Even the famous version of this argument by Harvard's Henry Louis Gates got fierce pushback from other scholars for letting the bias off the hook. The takeaway, this is a wound and somebody learned to press on it. Then the paths split even further. In 1884, European powers sat down at a table in Berlin and carved up the entire African continent between themselves. No African was in the room. Within about 30 years, Europe controlled roughly 90% of Africa. Meanwhile, across the ocean, Black Americans came out of slavery straight into Jim Crow. 100 years of laws built specifically to keep them at the bottom. So now you've got two branches of one family living two completely different nightmares. One under colonial rule over there, one under segregation over here. Different enemies, different struggles, different stories about themselves. By the time they'd meet again in large numbers, they'd been strangers for 300 years. And the reunion has a date, 1965. America passed the Immigration and Nationality Act, which finally scrapped the old racist country quotas. And for the first time, Africans started arriving in real numbers. The growth is staggering. The African-born population in the United States went from a tiny figure to over 2 million. African-born immigrants are now the fastest growing Black immigrant group in the country, roughly quadrupling between the year 2000 and 2024. Two strangers, the same blood, suddenly living on the same block. And here's the crazy part. They didn't recognize each other because both of them had been handed a script about who the other one was supposed to be. Let me say this plainly because it cuts both directions. A lot of African immigrants showed up already believing what Hollywood and the nightly news had taught them about Black Americans, that they were dangerous, lazy, criminal, stereotypes straight off a TV screen. And a lot of Black Americans had been fed an equally fake picture of Africa, Tarzan, jungles, starving kids with flies, a whole continent flattened into one sad cartoon. So some look down on Africans as backwards, and that's where the ugly playground stuff comes from. The slurs, African booty scratcher, thrown one way, akata, thrown back the other. Researchers have actually documented this exchange of insults. And here's the part I want to be really clear about. Those words aren't proof that the hate is natural. They're proof of the wound. Both kids were just repeating a lie a screen had told them about a cousin they'd never met. Then a newer wedge got driven in because African immigrants, on paper, do strikingly well. Around 46% of sub-Saharan African immigrants hold a bachelor's degree or higher, making them one of the most educated groups in the entire country. For Nigerian immigrants, specifically, it's about 67%, and people weaponize that number. They go, see, if Africans can make it, why can't Black Americans? Like it's a gotcha. But that comparison is rigged, and here's why. Moving across an ocean is expensive defensive and selective. The people who come are often already the doctors, the engineers, the students. You're comparing a hand-picked group to an entire native-born population that carried 400 years of slavery and segregation. It was never the same starting line. Turning one group's success into a stick to beat the other is exactly the kind of thing that keeps two cousins fighting instead of asking who set up the comparison. Which brings me to the question underneath all of it. Who wins when these two groups are at each other's throats? Because they don't. Neither of them. When the people at the bottom spend their energy fighting each other over who suffered correctly, nobody at the top ever has to answer for anything. Malcolm X said it decades ago. Divide and conquer is the oldest trick there is. The tension isn't a glitch. For somebody, it's the whole point. But here's what almost nobody tells you. The two halves of this family have found each other before, beautifully. There's a whole movement called Pan-Africanism, and it was largely built by a Black American. W.E.B. Du Bois organized the first Pan-African Congress back in 1919. Marcus Garvey had millions dreaming of a connection back to Africa, and when Ghana became the first sub-Saharan colony to win its independence in 1957, Black Americans celebrated like it was their own victory, because it was. For a long stretch of the 20th century, the African fighting colonial rule and the Black American marching for civil rights knew they were in the same fight. They wrote to each other. They showed up for each other. The solidarity was real, and it's coming back. In 2019, Ghana declared the year of return, marking 400 years since the first enslaved Africans were taken to Virginia and invited the descendants home. Thousands of Black Americans went. A lot of them stayed. So here's where I land. The tension between Africans and Black Americans is real, and it deserves to be taken seriously. But it was never written in anyone's blood. It was written by a slave ship, by a colonial map, by a TV screen, and by people who profit when family stays divided. And the thing about something that was taught is that it can be untaught. Same ancestors, same ocean. The line between them was drawn by history, and a line that was drawn by people can be erased by people too. If this gave you something to think about, subscribe. I dig into the stories underneath the stories. I'll see you in the next one.